What's up, everybody? It's your good friend Lukie, and I'm back with my buddy Dakota, and we are bringing it to you live. We're going to give you the Boxing Awards show for the hardcore fight enthusiasts of 2024. And for those that aren't hardcore fight enthusiasts and might just want to jump in at the end of the year and catch the best action and might somehow use this platform as a means to do so, well, that's also wonderful. Welcome. This is your first time. We love that. So not a traditional start time for us at 10 o'clock West Coast on a Thursday, but nothing about the holidays typically is traditional. So I think we will start untraditionally, kind of in a Lukie boxing manner, right? We're going to start really all over the place. And what I'm going to say we should do is we should talk about the fights that were going to happen but didn't happen. So Naoya Inoue was going to be fighting Sam Goodman this week. That fight is off. We believe that Inoue will be fighting in January, like January 24th. That's something. And then Ryan Garcia was going to fight a Japanese influencer or MMA person. I was really unsure of kind of the qualifications of that person. Yet Ryan got injured and that fight's not happening. That was going to be a pay-per-view fight that I think was happening at some point at or around this weekend in Japan, and now that's not happening. So those were supposed to be fights. We were supposed to actually end the year with a lot of fights. Instead, now we just have next week, which we'll preview at some point, only one real big fight, which is Ioka versus Puma Martinez 2.
If I may mention another fight that we thought would get made, but has just sort of been circling the perimeter of getting made for about, 10 months now or whatever, is Fundora and Errol Spence. I feel like every few months I see a meme or a news clip that fight is being negotiated in some way. And frankly, it's just like not a big enough fight for the amount of time that they've been putting into it, or at least hinting at the idea of it. That's one where it's like, I like the fight, make the fight if you're gonna, but I don't really understand the dance that they're doing on that matchup.
I get you, Dakota. And yeah, I mean, but I think for me, that's a different type of thing, because that issue is more so that's TV dates and figuring out when guys are healthy and ready to fight, etc. and whatever. I think for me, what was interesting was we had like a 1-2 punch of an Inoue and Ryan Garcia both in Japan to end the year. And Japan's had this possibly one of the biggest years ever in the sport of boxing. And yet we just kind of whimper into the sunset now, because it's like, okay, Inoue's opponent gets hurt. I'm glad he felt comfortable to pull out, because that would suck if you're fighting with a cut over your eye against Inoue. And then Garcia, like, did I care about that fight? No, but you get a Carmel Moulton fight on the undercard, and maybe what's his name? Amado Vargas versus Sean Garcia. Maybe there's something compelling there. But essentially what it means is there's no boxing, right? There's no boxing that matters.
Well, I guess all the more poetic that we kind of round out the year with an undisputed heavyweight fight between Usyk and Fury.
Shout out to Brian Artega in the chat. Hi. Appreciate that. And yeah. But I don't know. So we should probably jump right into the awards now. There is one fight that's happening this week. So I guess full transparency, I will say that fight. It happens tomorrow. Not sure the time, but it's an IBF flyweight eliminator between Felix Alvarado and Tobias Jeremias Reyes. So if you're a super hardcore fan, I highly doubt you're going to be able to watch that one on a streaming platform.
Well, Alvarado's a contender's contender.
Yeah, he's a true pro. I don't know if there's any streaming distribution for the fight, but if you're like, hey, boxing's really, really positive in my life, I'd really like to watch this fight. It's a number one contenders fight. He's fighting Tobias, is 16-0-1. He's from Argentina. Alvarado is, let's see. So is the fight being contested in Argentina? I think the fight's being contested in Nicaragua, but the flags look very similar. And my screen color isn't helping me here. It looks like the fight is taking place in Nicaragua, but Reyes is an undefeated Argentinian fighter. The fight is happening tomorrow. It looks like they have like 1 million fights on this card. Zero idea if you can watch this card, but it is something that I think if you're into like hardcore enthusiast fights, that's maybe something, to check out.
Like you said, Lukie, we're sort of rounding out the year slow. I tend to think of Usyk and Fury as a good closeout to 2024.
As it should be. I just that's the only fight I think that's happening this week that really matters on a global scale. Like the winner of this fight probably fights who's the IBF flyweight champion. This is such compelling radio right now. So the winner of this fight will probably fight, so I think it's an IBF flyweight belt. So the winner of this fight probably fights Meshameka Ibuki. So the winner of this fight probably fights Angel Ayala, and Ayala won the vacant title. Now this is just getting way too nerdy for probably most people, but this is a type of fight.
We're good to move on.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying this is the type of fight that could end up on a DAZN telecast, like a weaker telecast, and Galliafy is looking for an opponent, and this is like, oh, where's this? How did this fight come about? Well, this is the origin story. So there you go.
There you go.
There you go. Boxer of the year. You start, Dakota. Who's your boxer of the year?
Well, I feel like there are multiple good options here, but to me, at least, the most obvious one is Usyk. And maybe that's a little bit cliche, but I feel like when you beat the other best guy in your weight class 2 different times in a calendar year for an undisputed title, that warrants a level of significance that you got to really do something very special to do better than that. And so for me, at least in 2024, I think Usyk's accomplishments are without a doubt a highlight, particularly in light of some of our other stars maybe not being as active, namely Terrence Crawford. We see Beterbiev and Bivol fight, but Beterbiev is really a once-a-year kind of guy. So Devin Haney, Teofimo, Brian Garcia, there's plenty of star fighters that are just not particularly active right now. And so with Usyk doing something very, very special, to me, he's the guy of 2024.
Well, let's talk through the notable fighters, and I did make a list of sort. Do you like lists, Dakota?
Love a good list, bub.
You love a good list. I like a good list too. So I'm going to kind of go through my news and notes of the nominees, and then we can kind of unpack why I think Usyk is like universally the best fighter in boxing currently, and he should just outright win this award. But to me, and this is just to me, Usyk has 2 wins over arguably, if not outright, the best heavyweight of the era. One of the fights was an all-time classic. The second fight was pretty dominant win. So, I mean, I think that matters. You got Beterbiev, who I think beat Bivol upon rewatching the fight, but the fight just was too close, and he didn't fight enough for me to feel comfortable giving him the award, if that makes sense. Jesse Bam Rodriguez, 2 wins. The win over Estrada is friggin' awesome. He had a win over a solid guy. Probably needed a third fight for me to really boost up there. Dubois is the one that kind of got shafted this year. He got 2 big wins, but he just, they're not as good as beating Tyson Fury twice, become an undisputed champion. And really the way Usyk did it, kind of honorable mentions that had no chance of winning. Zordo, Junto Nakatani, Oscar Collazo, Nick Ball, and Buckram. I don't really see a world where you can give them the award, but they're just honorable mention guys that I think had outstanding years. Nick Ball in particular went from a guy that was like an attraction fighter now to possibly the best guy in the division. Collazo, we have no clue what the talent of his division is, but he makes it look really friggin' easy. Those are the nominees I came up with.
Well, and I think Murtazaliev is the real sleeper there. And that, my friend, is the upset that I was trying to think of before we started, was Murtazaliev and Tim Tszyu, which may not have been upset of the year, but goddamn, in a lot of other years, it would have been, because that was an incredible performance from Murtazaliev, who kind of bursts onto the scene as a top 5 guy. And I look forward to seeing what comes next from him in a really stacked division. And I think Bam has a legitimate case to being fighter of the year. I think that passing of the torch moment from Estrada is very significant. The fact that he had to get up off the deck. I'm not sure that I've seen him do that. Maybe he's been dropped in his career, but there was a lot of boxes checked in terms of the great fighter list when it came to Bam this year, for sure. I can't remember, when did he fight Sonny? Was that also
that was December? So
gotcha.
Another guy that I forgot to mention is Joseph Parker. And what hurt Parker was he beat Deontay Wilder, but it was last December. So it's like, it's hard because he had that win over Zhang and he has the win over Wilder, but it didn't happen in one official calendar year, but it really felt that way. And that's kind of what happened to Jesse Bam to me too, is he had 2 really big wins, but they didn't quite come in one flowing calendar year.
Well, the one win was big enough for him to at least get a mention from us.
So I would like to talk about why Usyk's our best fighter of the year.
Take the lead, my friend. I think it's very obvious why, but carry on.
Okay, well, I mean, I wanted to write down in the show notes for those listening when to start listening if they just wanted to hear this part. But why Usyk to me is the best fighter of the year is kind of everything about his journey. And I think one thing about Usyk that's really weird is there's a level of like he's not good that I've never seen for an elite. Maybe it's like Lennox Lewis. Lennox got a little bit of that, like at least from my memory of Lennox, where people be like, this guy isn't as good as people thought he was. He's not as good as Tyson or Ali. And really, when you look back on it, I think Lennox was one of like the 4 best heavyweights ever, but there was a little bit of, he got knocked out. So to me, Usyk is obviously the best cruiserweight. I think he's better than Evander Holyfield just because he has more dimensions than Holyfield. Holyfield was a great fighter, but he was more of a in-your-face action fighter who was tremendous in his era. What I find interesting about Usyk is once he transitioned and adjusted to heavyweight, he beat all the best guys of his era. So he beat Joshua twice at home. He beats Dubois, who at the time was viewed as a quitter and all this bad stuff about him. Dubois fights Usyk. Some people don't acknowledge that he got punched low, which I think there is. We'll get into this conversation about Usyk, where it's like there is like a group of people that just don't like the guy. So if something goes wrong, it's like, I told you he's pussy. I told you he got stopped with a body shot. He gets hit low and then stops Dubois. Dubois turns around and has one of the best years in 2024. That's the guy he took as his tune-up fight. And then this year, to win the award, he fights Tyson Fury as an underdog, wins the fight, in my opinion, pretty convincingly. That first fight to me wasn't a split decision. I felt like the 9th round really was an emphatic win, and it really was the moment that we all looked at and went, that's a great moment in the history of boxing. And then after that moment, I think a lot of people were like, okay, but what's Fury going to do? Well, Fury came very focused in the second fight, slightly different game plan, and still nothing. Unable to adjust, unable to take the fight over. To me, the problem with the second fight was I was waiting for that round 9 moment, and the fight just kind of flew by. It wasn't like there was no real intense drama. I was never at the side. It always felt like Usyk was winning the second fight in a way. Even when he was losing the fight on my card, it always felt like Usyk knew when to pick his spots, when to pick it up. So to me, I guess the perception too is it depends on how you rate Fury, but I saw Fury as the man of the generation. I saw him clearly as a class above Joshua, and I saw him as just this really tough puzzle. And Usyk basically beat him two different ways. He nearly stopped him in the first fight, and then he just mentally broke him and outboxed him in the second fight. So those two victories against basically the other great heavyweight of his era, to me, leads him to this point.
Absolutely. I think, to use as a comparison, when the Crawford beat Errol Spence, of course, rightfully so, he was given a lot of accolades. But to be honest, I feel like this was sort of a Crawford Spence of heavyweights. And for me, Fury's accomplishments do sort of outweigh Spence's. And so I feel like even the quality of these wins for Usyk is about as good as he can get, man. You're taking an unbeaten lineal heavyweight champion who's the best since Klitschko and has really kind of he's also been just a figure it out guy. Like there has been multiple times where we're like, I don't know if he's got it, and he finds a way to pull it out. So there's a lot of layers to the quality of the wins for Usyk.
For sure. And I think we're looking at this year, right? And there were great fights made, but it's like with Beterbiev, do you really feel like he separated himself from Bivol? I didn't fully feel comfortable saying like he should win the award because it's like he didn't fully separate. Like to me, there's a level of domination in Fighter of the Year. Usyk separated. He's the better fighter. The only fighter I saw having a comparable year was Daniel Dubois, but Dubois arguably didn't face the level of competition twice that Usyk did because Usyk fought the most regarded champion to unify.
It's a great point. Yeah, I this is Usyk's year, undeniably for me.
Do you think any outlet's going to have the balls to not give it to him?
It's tough because again, so many of the other stars haven't fought that much. We saw Benavidez once, I think. We saw Tank once. We see Crawford once. Like any of the great American stars of the moment just don't fight. And so it makes it a tough. It's tough for anyone else to make the argument that they cumulatively did enough to earn it in a year where Usyk beats the other best heavyweight two times.
Very, very fair point by you, Dakota. Now let's shift over to the fight of the year, which isn't going to be that exciting for most people, probably. What do you think is the fight of the year? Or should we do nominees? Should I run through a list of my nominees that I wrote down?
There's a couple that stand out for me that probably wouldn't get fight of the year, but they were just fights that really stuck with me. One of them was Yankiel Rivera and Andy Dominguez, which was earlier in the year. And that was an absolute banger of a fight. It was one of those competitive and not that close. But, man, Dominguez really brought it in that fight, and that was a bruiser. Another deep cut that stuck out for me was Lipinets and Robbie Davies. I believe that was a pro box fight. And definitely was not one that I was expecting the level of what I saw. And it was a brutal fight from two contenders whose best days are kind of behind them. But it was a hell of a fucking fight, bro. The big one for me that really stands out just as a fight was Virgil Ortiz and Serhij Bohachuk. A super high level action fight. We see Bohachuk again on this Usyk Fury undercard, and we kind of get a sense of his quality. That in terms of an action fight was really the fight for me. But of course, I think the significance of Beterbiev and Bivol and the Usyk Fury matchup, and the level that those were contested at, it makes it tough, bro. There's a lot of good options for this year.
Yeah, I mean, to me, just running through the nominees, obviously we think Usyk Fury I is the best fight of the year, so we'll talk about that in detail in a second. I think Fundora Tim Tszyu, you could make a case. To me, it wasn't like the most exciting fight.
Absolutely.
It kind of felt like Fundora, for lack of a better word, elbowed Tim Tszyu, and that was the adjustment, and then Tim could never get past that. Beterbiev Bivol, in a different sense, was like a fight of the year, but it was just a high level, really good fight. Virgil Ortiz, Serhij Boachuk to me was a really good fight that really people forget about. That was kind of I think in many other years that would easily win fight of the year, but it kind of fell under the radar because it was like a smaller show, didn't happen on one of these big events. I think Tasumi versus Takuma Inoue is a banger of a fight, and I think a lot of people didn't see that fight, but Tasumi, who I call the Tsunami, that was a good one. The first Fraser Clark Fabio Wardley fight was a good one. If we want to go back deep cut, Kenshiro Taraji versus Carlos Canizales to start last year, just a reckless brawl of a fight. Ray Ford versus Klomatov was a real interesting one that had a 12th round dramatic knockout. And I mean, that's, if you want to be controversial, you could actually say Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia in this category, because there was something about that fight that's always going to be talked about. It's not my cup of tea.
Fight though, Bob.
It wasn't a good fight, but I think there was a lot of drama to that fight night. There was a lot of stories unfolding in the ring. So I think that fight deserves an honorable mention in that regard.
It's understandable. I just don't think that either of them were active enough for long stretches of the fight. Of course, there were bursts of excitement with the knockdowns, and then Devin kind of winning some rounds back, but it really just that one wasn't it for me. If anything, that fight is kind of the stain on 2024 for me.
Okay, and Lane 99 said, thanks from Canada on Boxing Day for your year of shows. We really appreciate you, Lane 99. Let's talk about now why Usyk-Fury won this award for us.
I think the swings and momentum mixed with the significance, right? Because Usyk comes out, he's really good early. Fury kind of dominates the middle rounds, and then Usyk is able to make an adjustment to the adjustment, get the knockdown, and creates a drama where Fury's kind of holding on down the back stretch of the fight. The swings in that of momentum in that fight were just tremendous. It was a very high level. I think part of the lack of like a crescendo that you were looking for in the second one was them knowing each other a little better and kind of having a sense of each other's tendencies. So there was some less mistakes made, I think, from both of them. But yeah, the fact that it was, for all four belts with massive swings in momentum fought at a really high level, it doesn't really get any better than that, bub.
Yeah, it doesn't get any better than that. So to me, what was great about the fight was halfway through the fight, I felt as though Tyson Fury had figured him out and was adjusting and was getting ready to move on and stop him. And he was going to stop Usyk being the bigger man. And what made it the best fight of the year was Usyk made the adjustment and completely changed the fight, which rarely you see when you're a boxing guy and you see that kind of stuff and you go, oh, I figured him out,
Yeah, and the thing was, Fury had that moment in the fight too, and I think that's what was so special about it. I mean, that's a great point, Baraka Moody. That was a hell of a performance. I mean, in terms of it being an upset, I don't know how much of an upset that was, but it was a fantastic performance from Brian Norman. Maybe significant enough to get sort of the honorable mention on the fight of the year conversation, at least.
Yeah, I mean, we'll discuss that. But to me, what made this fight of the year, and I always go back to it, is that 9th round. The fight started to even out, and the fact that Usyk got the standing 8, basically knocked Fury down. Every fight of the year to me kind of has that moment that's like a crescendo, like a get up out of your seat. And for me, that fight, when he did that, there were a lot of people, I felt boxing people, that were cheering for Usyk. And when that happened, I felt like a lot of people were nervous that Fury was going to win, and getting that result and then seeing him take over in the later half. I think that's, to me, why that's the fight of the year. And I don't really see a fight coming close to that fight in terms of everything from historical importance to everything, just everything about it.
Special night, bro. Special night. They gave us some special nights this year, those two.
Okay, so now we will go to the next award, which I got to figure out what it is. The next award will be, we'll go Trainer of the Year next. And for Trainer of the Year, should I just name the nominees and then we'll pick it, or should I just do all the honorable mentions? What do you think?
You're driving the bus, bro. I think you should.
Okay, so I'll do the honorable mentions before I do the thing. I think that's what I've been doing. I think Andy Lee deserves an honorable mention. I think he's had a solid year. He flies under the radar. I think Mark Ramsey working with Artur Beterbiev deserves an honorable mention. Brian Boback McIntyre deserves an honorable mention. Robert Garcia basically every year deserves an honorable mention because he has so many top level fighters that are there. Rudy Hernandez for his work with Junto Nakatani deserves an honorable mention in my eyes. But my Trainer of the Year this year is Don Charles, who has been working with Daniel Dubois, who I think you saw the biggest level of improvement in Dubois this year. So that's my pick for this award.
It's a tremendous pick. They had a hell of a year, sort of completely reshaping the direction and trajectory of Dubois' career. And there's no doubt that the coach is a part of that. I think Robert is also one of those guys. He could just be Trainer of the Year every year because he just has so many high-level guys at various points in their careers. There's prospects, there's contenders, there's champions, but he just seems to have an incredible batch of talent that he's working with. So he's like LeBron, bro. You could just give him MVP every year if you really wanted to. And to be honest, I think the other thing is that Usyk's trainer is not particularly public facing. I couldn't even tell you his name.
Well, that was the problem. Is I love giving Fighter of the Year to the Trainer of the Year and Fighter of the Year together, but Usyk's trainer, I can't for the life of me figure out who it is. So because of I'm not sure of who that trainer is, I don't feel comfortable giving the award away because it's like it's never even specified.
Yeah, and I think there was a period of time where Lomachenko's dad was the guy in his corner. I don't know if that's the case anymore. It didn't look like it. So
no,
he's got
now it's changed a lot over time. So there was because I got a press release back in the day where they're like, okay, Loma's dad's training Usyk, and then he went to a guy named Evgeny something or another, and I think he's changed again. I think it might be someone named Lapin. Let me check that in. Is it Sergey Lapin?
He trains.
Oh, go ahead.
He trains with a guy named Daniel Lapin. So I don't know if there's some kind of relation, but I think that makes the point even more so, though, that, you and I who have, watch all these fights and know a lot of these trainers could not identify, who's responsible for these Usyk camps. And I think that part of that, it's got to be intentional. I know that the political climate of where they live is very sensitive. And so that obviously could be a contributor to Usyk's training situation.
Yeah, to me, it's hard because I don't want to say I want a trainer to go out there and be braggadocious and take an award based on personality. But there is a level of if you play the background, you're probably going to be second fiddle. And Don Charles isn't some guy that's out there. I think there's a lot of fight fans who don't know who Don Charles is. And because of that, I think Don Charles probably doesn't win this award by a lot of outlets. But there's times where people talk about what's Don Charles doing. And the thing with Usyk, I think this is the thing with me about Usyk with Trainer of the Year. There hasn't been a steady voice or a crazy change in his style during periods. It feels like what he worked on as a child, he's perfecting with other coaches. So I'm not sure how much of it is the coach and how much of it is Usyk. So I get that there's a preparation component to his fights and that it matters. But with Usyk, he's someone where it's LeBron James should probably win MVP for the last 15 years because he probably is the most invaluable player, or Steph Curry is. But they're just not going to win it. And I think that sometimes guys win Coach of the Year just because they got LeBron or Steph. It's not because I'm trying to decipher how good his coach is or how good Usyk is. And what's the difference between Don Charles taking a fighter who most people thought was broken and mentally weak and resurrecting his career to making him a world champion, or Robert Garcia having all these different level of fighters. And sometimes guys are winning and sometimes guys are losing, but he's continuously moving them in certain ways. I don't really know how to assess that.
Ultimately, I think, though, that's why Don is the best pick for the year, because he's a guy that really stuck it out with a guy who's had some peaks and valleys. And now here they are, they're IBF champ. Usyk has to fight Dubois again to become undisputed again. And, should Dubois beat Joseph Parker, it'll be one of the greatest year-plus stretches that I can remember for any fighter, particularly a fighter coming off with devastating losses.
I mean, with Don Charles, right? He fights Hrgović, who in a lot of Hrgović fights, he's been very underwhelming, but people thought so low of Usyk, or not Usyk. Well, kind of, you could make the case of that, but they thought so lowly of Daniel Dubois that they viewed Usyk's loss to him as another way of seeing how mentally weak he was. Whereas in that fight, I saw him mentally strong in large periods of the fight, where he was doing a lot of good work in that fight early, and then it looked like he hit Usyk in the balls. Usyk got pissed and just took over the fight. I'm not sure, man. I'm not sure. But so I'm rambling. I'm coffee high, but let me talk through this year. So he fights Hrgović. Hrgović is, I don't know, kind of everything people said Dubois was. Kind of a front runner, kind of like when things don't go his way, we haven't seen him shift gears. Hrgovic's the favorite, and Dubois beats him. And then I think the story there turned into, well, Hrgović just sucks. So he went in as the favorite, but Dubois got no credit. Then he goes into an Anthony Joshua fight where he's largely being disrespected. The whole show is built around Joshua. This is like Joshua getting himself back. If you remember the storyline, he had stopped Otto Wallin. He had stopped the MMA guy Ngannou. He's back to his old self. Ben Davidson's turned him into a puncher. He's coming forward. This is the AJ we always wanted to see. And he did the AJ traditional iPods. The pods are in, and he's not talking, and he's got big baseball gloves. And Dubois just beat the hell out of him. He beat him up, and he basically gave him a career-altering knockout, one that I think will forever change his career's path. And he did it also in the perspective of Don Charles was part of the story. Where's Don Charles fight week? Where's Don Charles this? And I think it's impressive that whatever Don's done with Dubois since he got him, he's figured out a way to get the most out of Dubois. And I think that's the sign of a good coach, is he took a very good fighter, but now is finding the exceptional traits and having him be exceptional at those. And there are limitations to Dubois. And I also would like to say, typically those are the guys that win fight of the year or trainer of the year, are the guys that have some flaws, but get with a trainer. That's why Bomac wins a lot of times, because Bomac gets some flawed guys, but he figures out a way to make it work. So that's my rant right there.
Yeah, I think ultimately coach of the year is who's getting the most out of their guy. And I think that this is a very appropriate pick.
You don't want to go on a little heater?
Well, listen, bro, I think that there's always multiple good options, right? But when we look at where Daniel Dubois started the year and where he ended it, one, it gives him an argument for fight of the year. And obviously the people backing him and supporting him and in the gym with him are a massive piece of that, because no fighter does it alone. And I think to see Dubois be able to be like slightly more tactical, but ultimately just play bully ball a little bit with a lot of these guys. Clearly, Don is giving him some direction and some identity as a fighter that maybe he was lacking after the Joyce fight.
Well, and I think the other thing too, right, is like, what's a mentally weak person? Typically a bully. So how do you get the most out of someone that's mentally weak? We'll have them start fast, have them gain the upper hand. And there's a little bit of like the obvious answer was, okay, with Dubois, he's not good at coming back. He's not great at adjusting. Let's just have this guy try to beat guys up and use his hand speed and use his reflexes. let's not have him be a thinker. Let's not try to have him. Let's just really go all in on what he's good at.
Which I think they've done, man. That's really how he beat Joshua, was just out hustling him and setting a tempo that clearly Joshua was uncomfortable with and not willing to match it by creating an outside fight or matching Dubois on the inside.
Yeah, it's good. This kind of dogtails in. We're gonna do comeback of the year now. So, what do you think should I read through a list of nominees for comeback fighter of the year? Because I mean, I think that the one that stands out to me that didn't get the award, but he was right there, is Sebastian Fundora. I think Fundora really makes a case for being a comeback fighter of the year. He'd been knocked out the year prior by Brian Mendoza. Kind of was in career limbo, takes this fight, was going to fight Serhii Boachuk, and then wins against Tim Tszyu. We haven't seen him again, but now he's a guy. I think that's one name that comes to mind. Also, obviously, Martin Bakole knocks out Jared Anderson. He had lost to Michael Hunter early in his career. Now he's one of the more compelling figures. Joseph Parker, probably can't give it to him fully because the Wilder win was in December, but it's like that's there. I would argue Richardson Hitchens deserve to be mentioned in this award because a lot of people were looking at him from the Lemos fight and going, okay, this guy's been figured out. He's very limited. Angelo Leo is another guy. He lost a world title, rebuilt himself on Pro Box. And if you want to get really artisanal, I think you could even say Virgil Ortiz. He had been out the whole year prior. We didn't know how his health was, and he fights 3 times this year. So I think Virgil Ortiz makes a case, but those aren't my comeback fighters of the year. Dakota, do you have any more that you want to add?
I mean, to me, to kind of go with the coach of the year, it feels like Dubois is the comeback fighter of the year.
Well, that is our winner. That is our winner. So now why don't you go on that?
It just seems like when you have a guy, you know, I can't remember exactly the timeline of when he fought Usyk, but I think it was the tail end of 2023.
It was like August or September, because he waited around the whole year for the Fury fight. Right. And then so it wasn't going to happen.
It was the last quarter of 2023-ish. And to go from that, also compounding it with the Joe Joyce loss, having a fight with a cruiserweight whose name I can't remember at the moment, but he gets dropped a couple times early in the fight. And
Kevin Lorena.
Yeah, Kevin Lorena. It just felt like he looked super vulnerable in that fight and was ultimately, you know, he showed grit, he showed balls, but it looked like he just knocked him out because he was the bigger guy. So I think that there was a ton of questions about him in terms of, is he going to be something other than just like an interesting contender? And I feel like he's, in this year, completely reshaped it to a point where like he's really got an argument for being the number 3 guy in the division and potentially the number 2 guy, depending on how this Parker fight goes.
What I think what makes the Parker fight so fun for us hardcore guys is they both came back. They both were guys like, I thought Parker was done after the Joe Joyce fight. I'm like, man, this guy could fight, but he just took too much damage. And now he's going to be a journeyman. And instead he won some big fights. And now Joe Joyce has hit that expiration point. And if they fought now, I think nobody would pick Joyce. And it's just quite crazy how things kind of ebb and flow. But what makes that fight so interesting to me is Dubois and Joe Parker are 2 guys that in the last 5 years, people believe were done. They were going to quit. They aren't good.
They have both kind of recreated their brands from interesting lower level contenders to top level guys. And I think that doing it kind of in parallel timelines and now meeting each other in this moment, you know, that's easily a main event fight.
Well, let me go a little deeper, Dakota. I think they were mid-level market exceptional talents that we didn't know if they could become world-class fighters, but they had regions where people really believed in them, right?
Well, I think we knew Parker. I think we knew Parker was world-class. It's just, is he going to be anything more than like the 6th man? You know?
Well, Parker, if you remember, he fought Andy Ruiz, and there was a lot of people that thought that fight was very close and it could have gone either way. And it wasn't like a definitive win. So it kind of felt as though this is a vulnerable guy. This is a guy that could be very, very vulnerable, etc. And then you look at Dubois, he was viewed as like a top prospect, the most promising British fighter. And then Joe Joyce stops him, and like he has a very serious eye injury, and most people are like, what a pussy. This guy should have like tried to fight while blind. I just don't think he has it. He needs to retire. So like Parker, I think there was always a sentiment of like, yeah, he won a belt, but this is probably going to be the guy that comes in, and he's a veteran, and really great fighters beat him pretty handily. Dubois, I think people thought could be up there with AJ, but then the way he lost was so emotional. I think people completely wrote him off and stopped watching his development. So for those two to meet, and they took a similar journey, but a different.
Which is crazy to me, right? Not to cut you off, Lukey, but that's what's so crazy to me is it's like I think about how much grace Joshua has gotten through so many bad performances, but it feels like other British fighters don't necessarily get that grace. It's like you got to become that star to get that grace. And Joshua gets it in abundance, and it felt like Dubois got written off very quickly, losing to the best guy in the division and also suffering an injury that, you know, if you can fight through that, you're truly just built different. A lot of guys cannot. And we saw it with Robesi this year.
Well, I also think like it's kind of like getting your jaw broken. Like I remember reading a Kieran Mulvaney column a long time ago. Shout out my guy Kieran Mulvaney, one of my favorite boxing writers and just a nice man. And it was kind of like about like how boxing fans love to call Victor Ortiz a pussy for not fighting with a broken jaw, but then we never talk about Paulie or Arthur Abraham and how amazing it is that they fight with a broken jaw. It's always like, let's shame the guy that if any of us got our jaw broken, we would cry and we'd never want that to happen. But then we have these unrealistic expectations, and then we never go, man, this guy Oscar Valdez, he had a broken jaw and he just was so committed. He did it. We need to just be behind him because of what he does. And yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of where I had never seen something like the Dubois thing. That was what I think I'd literally call a debacle, where it was a borderline 50-50. We don't know what to do with either fighter prospect type fight happening during COVID. And Dubois just gets beat up by Joyce, who's probably that's peak top Joyce ever. That's probably like Joyce on his best night. And, you know, that one night defined Dubois all the way to the Joshua fight. And I think that even now people are like, well, Joshua sucks. And it's kind of like Usyk, right? Like Usyk has had a bad fight here and there, but he's had a lot of amazing nights, and people never want to go, hey, this guy's pretty good.
Can't do nothing about those people, bub.
So is there anything else we want to talk about with comeback fighter of the year? We kind of went long on that one, but I think Dubois is like a really interesting figure that deserves being talked about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we've covered that one pretty good.
Okay, we've covered that one. So let's go to round of the year. Round of the year. So round of the year to me is fairly obvious, but I guess for the sake of things, I should read out the round of the years. So, okay, here we go. Let's see, round of the year. Round of the year. Rayford, Otabek, Klomatov, round 12. Caleb Plant versus Trevor McCumbee, round 9. It's kind of the whole fight, but I think that moment, Plant getting dropped and then getting back to his feet and then standing up and then winning in an emphatic stoppage. I think round 9, Usyk-Fury, better be Bivol. I put round 10 when the fight kind of got really going. And then I got a hidden gem. So if there's people on here, and there probably are really big sickos like us, Doak Inoue versus Tyson Kokei, Japanese fight. I can't tell you which one it was, but one guy is like a prospect power puncher, drops the guy, walks into a punch and gets knocked out when trying to finish. So it's a first round knockout upset. Is it like the best fight of the year? No. But if you're fighting a hangover and you want to watch just something that's like you didn't see all year and it's pretty crazy, I'd give it a watch. Dakota, any other round of the years you want to contribute?
None that I can think of specifically, but I think for one, the Ray Ford Kolmatov round 12 was an emphatic way to end the fight. It stuck out with me the whole year. And Ray, of course, has had that win, then the loss to Nick Ball, then another kind of quality win after that. So he's had, in a sense, an up and down year. But man, that was one of those moments where it felt like Ray Ford really arrived as a championship level fighter. And that whole fight as a whole was just an incredible one.
Yeah, it was a strange fight, right? Because it was like it was picked up by Top Rank. Kolmatov was signed by Top Rank before the fight. Kolmatov has not fought since that fight. And it was just like a really tense world title fight. And then Ray Ford springboarded from that performance to have fights on DAZN. So it was like a weird situation where it was like the promoter that bought the fight, that marketed the fight, actually didn't benefit at all from the fight. There was like no springboard to anybody on there. Not that that matters, but that's something I kind of looked at with that fight, is why I think it goes unwatched, is you didn't really see towards the end of the year, oh man, look at this dramatic 12th round for Ray Ford. It's one of the great, because it wasn't beneficial to the network per se.
It's a great point, and maybe that was part of why it was so special, is that it was a little bit of a surprise. Listen, bro, it's a hell of a fight. That's a real 50-50 fight. The winner of that fight is the obvious sort of leading candidate for Usyk's next opponent going into 2025. I don't know who to pick on that one, bro. I keep going back and forth. Hell yeah, CapQuest, Big Jersey. Shout out.
Okay, one of your friends in the chat. And I think it's our round of the year is Abdullah Mason versus Johan Vazquez, round 1. It was unhinged. It looked like Mason was going to knock this guy out. He got sat on his wallet twice. It's everything you wanted from kind of a boxing match, but also like a prospect who's being compared to like all-time great fighters, probably prematurely because of how good he's looking. And then he faces adversity and his response is like, let me fight back.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have anything to add beyond that?
Well, it felt like you were going to keep going, so I didn't want to jump on your toes there.
No, I'm pretty much done on that one. Shout
No,
out to chat.
it was a fantastic round, bro, and it was also for me, in terms of Abdullah, being able to survive something like that as such a young fighter, that can kind of turn into like a meltdown moment. And so to see him kind of pull it together and stay composed and not really get too far outside of himself, that as much as those can be bad moments, when you're able to survive them as a young fighter, I think that shows a certain level of the fighter's character that you need to be a top level guy. CapQuest is saying, I keep hearing he's chinny, it's tough. He got caught, right? So guys that don't get caught don't have their chins checked. And that could have been just a little bit more of a developmental moment. I try not to be too harsh, particularly with young fighters. I look to what the response is, and the response from him was A1.
I think that also, like CapQuest, that's the sign of a novice boxing fan, right? I think that Abdullah is looking for knockouts and looking for sensational performances. And like Dakota said, that was a growing moment. That was a learning moment where he learned he couldn't knock everybody out. If you're a power puncher and you swing wide and you look for stoppages, what the other side to that is, you're going to get hit. You're going to be open. You're going to be countered. And I think a lot of people are telling on themselves because we saw a young 19, 20-year-old kid go for a finish and get caught by a wily veteran who planted his feet and threw back with him. And he passed every checkpoint I wanted from a great young fighter, because a lot of guys would have been, this isn't fun. And he just bit down and found a way to stop the guy. I think that honestly, to me, being chinny is different than most people. I think a guy like Amir Khan has an above average chin. And you might laugh at me and say, what do you mean by that? Because he got dropped. Well, he always got up. So my definition of chinny is when guys are getting clipped and there's no willingness to get up.
Yeah,
So,
Amir didn't always get up.
no, but there was always like a fighter's spirit about Amir. So like when he got hurt, like I think a chinny is a guy where you hit him and their whole demeanor changes.
Sure, and there's great fighters that were chinny, right? Like Vladimir Klitschko was a little chinny, particularly early in his career. He got stopped multiple times, but he developed a style, that made him very, very difficult to hit. And a lot of great fighters that were chinny have just had to build styles to work around that chinniness. There's also a thing, like, listen, bro, it's boxing. It's a matter of time before you have that experience of somebody really doing harm to you in the ring, and just seeing how you respond and seeing how he responded. It was impressive, bro. And that's coming whether it's, when he's 20 years old or whether he's in a title fight. At some point, that moment is going to arrive, unless you're one of maybe like 10 fighters ever.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. That's a good moment. Next category that we're going to do, let's see, timestamp city, prospect of the year. So prospect of the year, kind of, I don't know. I'd say it's pretty much like, this is what do you feel? I think this is going to be the first one that me and Dakota probably are a little different on. For me, I'd say the honorable mentions would be Abdullah Mason. Obviously, Abdullah is a top fighter, but he also has flaws. He got dropped. I think that when you're dealing with prospect of the year, getting dropped does matter. It impacts your standing in that per se. Another person who stood out to me, Rohan Polanco. No one talks about him. He's a very good fighter. Tremendous. Obviously, our guy Troy Isley. I'm not sure K by L is considered a prospect or a contender, but if he is a prospect, he's in the conversation. Steven Navarro, Albert Chop Chop Gonzalez, Joel Irarte, De Niro, the Fear Perot. And if you want to just kind of go for like hedging your bets on a guy that might be at next year, Carmel Moulton. The opposition hasn't been there, but he looks extremely talented.
Everybody you just listed stands out right now as kind of the future of boxing. Steve Navarro is, I think, doing shit on a technical level that guys his age just generally are not doing. He just kind of looks like a finished product already. Obviously, as he moves up in competition, he's going to have to figure other things out. But it's rare when you see young guys like that just look ready to go. Chop is doing some really incredible stuff. For me, I got to go with what CapQuest is saying, man. Moses Itauma.
Well, that was my pick. So you're doing the show pick.
Yeah, as much as I think that there's a ton of young talent. Rohan Polanco, again, a guy that doesn't get the same kind of conversations as some other American prospects do at the moment. But Moses Itauma, being a 19-year-old guy, taking a 22-1 fringe contender and just putting him out in the first round and looking so physically dominant as such a young guy. When I think about prospect of the year, I'm thinking about not necessarily who's had the best year, but who's got the most upside. And it's tough to see, like, what the limit is going to be for a kid like that who's already so explosive. He's going to be a problem, bro. He's going to be a problem. There's a lot of upside to that kid.
I think the other thing we have to talk about is he fought Dempsey McKean. And for many people, they might giggle, laugh. Okay. He had only lost once prior, and it was in his previous fight to Filip Hrgovic, and I believe it was a 12th round stoppage. Hrgovic had figured him out and was winning most of the rounds, but it still went 12 rounds. Moses stopped him in 1 round. So I think that part of what it is he fought a guy, veteran gatekeeper, Marcial Wash, and stopped him in 2 rounds. And then stops Dempsey McKean in 1 round. These are fringe contenders in my mind. They're not top contenders, but they're still notable top fighters that I think are more valid than your average prospect is fighting.
They're also the kind of guys that you start fighting when it looks like you're getting ready to take a real jump up. Like, those are the kinds of fights we still haven't seen, like, Richard Torres in with necessarily, and this kid's taking him at 19 years old so early in his career, you know, and that's not a slight on Richard. I'm saying this kid is moving at a pace, and he's checking the boxes in a way that just, like, you don't see very often, and you don't know if that's a bright light that's not going to shine real long. But right now, bro, it just looks like sky's the limit.
Well, I think also it's like, here's the catch 22. He's looking so good, you can't move him down. And we talked about this on the show after is, you know, most people are probably seeing him get these great wins and phenomenal performance, and they're going watching it on IG. Oh, this guy's maybe better than Joshua, or he's better than this. So now people are so excited. Here's a young I think he's 19, 11 or 12 fights. They want to see him in those big fights. So I think that the logical next fight is him versus Hrgovic, right? You put him in with a Hrgovic who's had his troubles recently. But then where do you go from there, right? We see in the chat, I want to see Moses against Jared Anderson. I do too. But when you start making those fights, you run into the Daniel Dubois thing. Dubois was really good as a prospect coming up, and then he hit some resistance young in that phase where he had to grow and got written off. So I think what's interesting to me and what I'm curious about is how the developmental process will go in this.
Yeah, it's so tough to know because, you know, if you're going by what the average 19-year-old is prepared to handle, I would say no, you're going too early, but it just looks like he's doing it different. That's the only way I could put it.
That is a great way to put it, Dakota. Let's go to the next one. So far there's been like no debate. It's been very, dare I say, boring. Like so let's go to upset of the year. I think once again we're going to have a unanimous upset of the year. Just off the top of my head, I will timestamp this for those listening. That the ones that stand out to me upset of the year, and I will read as such. Daniel Dubois, Anthony Joshua, Liam Paro versus Sabril Matisse, Anthony Casse versus Joe Cordina, Old Man Ismail Barroso knocking out O'Hara Davies, Martin Bacoli versus Jared Anderson, Fandora Tim Zhu, and I guess you could put Norman versus Giovanni in this category, as well as Dennis Baranchek versus Emmanuel Navarrete. Those are the ones that kind of come to mind. I think another one that you brought up was, I don't know who knocked him out, but Kid Kansas Garcia, Alan Garcia getting knocked out by a guy with a 15-15 like record and not many knockouts probably goes there as well.
Those are all great picks. I think the two big ones, right, which maybe you're teeing me up for. Let's start with the one that I could not remember for about 5 minutes. Murtazaliev stopping Tim Zhu. Obviously, Fundora would be a great pick, but I think the way, you know, the way that the Fundora fight went, I don't think took away any credibility from Tim Zhu. So there was already rumors that he was going to fight Virgil. Like, Tim Zhu had not been taken out of the mix by that performance. And I think what we were expecting was to see one of the best guys at 154 beat a mandatory type of fight. And what we witnessed was Murtazaliev completely take apart what we thought was a top 3 guy in the division. And to me, you know, it was one-sided. It was everything you look for in an upset. You didn't see it coming. You didn't know too much about Murtazaliev. It was a brilliant performance and not one that any of us expected. So I think that as a leading candidate.
Well, I think also, just to step on your toes, it was the defiant and disrespectful nature he did it in. There was nothing competitive about the fight. And I think that was the big takeaway too for me.
Right. Not for 1 second was it competitive. The Dubois Joshua one is so tremendous, but at the end of the day, I didn't necessarily personally view the result as an upset so much as the way that the fight went down being shocking. Not that it was shocking, but I don't necessarily knew that I thought that Dubois would just completely out hustle Joshua and make him look done. I don't know that I saw that coming, but to say it was an upset, I'm not sure. The obvious one I'll tee up to you right after, But a guy with 4 knockouts in Bruno Surace getting a knockout over Jaime Munguia was one of the most out of nowhere exciting moments that I can remember this year. And certainly something that, none of us saw coming.
I mean, I think for Bruno Surace, the big thing I saw was it Munguia has flaws, right? And I think that big takeaway is how many rounds did he spar throughout his life? How many hard fights has he been in? And there was a lack of disrespect of this guy's punching power, that this guy can't hurt me. And what ended up happening was just really a nightmare for Munguia. It's really been a year that really helped him in a lot of ways. He beats John Ryder. He fights Canelo, but doesn't get stopped. He has a really crappy performance against Eric Bazinian, which I think could have foreshadowed this performance. But I think the other way people were looking at it is, okay, he's working on boxing, etc. And then in this fight, he basically just walks into the perfect punch because he just assumed that this guy was not going to hurt him. And now he's entering into a rematch with a guy who knocked him out for an upset of the year contender that really should have never happened, if we're being real. Bruno was a tremendous boxer and was giving him trouble, but he didn't have the power up until this point to really impact Munguia. Munguia's size and strength looked to be winning the fight alone. But now I think we have durability. If you want to talk about chinny, I think there might be a question if Munguia is now chinny from the damage he's absorbed.
Right. And we've talked about that even in winning efforts, him taking so much punishment on multiple occasions. That may all be adding up. He's had 40 some odd fights. I know he's a young guy, but that's fighter age is punishment. The punishment meter is the biggest part of that, more so than the number. And we may have seen some of that. The other thing too, though, bro, is he did just walk the fuck right into it. And the way that Surace really wound up with it, and you could see loaded up with everything he had, and Munguia was right there to take it. You could say that's chinny. You could also call that defensive liability, because if you're not there to get hit by that shot, we don't know about your chin. So it was one where he was very open. It was the perfect punch, and it was also a fighter with everything against him, rising to the occasion.
It's just a sheer level of laziness that I did not want to see in a high-level prize fighter. There was no jab, there was a lot of following, and there was a lot of, this guy can't hurt me.
He thought he was going to be more of a bully, and he wasn't able to be as much of a bully as he wanted to be, and he just left himself wide open, bro.
It's the facts, Jack, and Jack Kelly's not on the show today. Okay, so let's see. What's the last couple? We have knockout of the year. So knockout of the year, we are just steamrolling through these. Let's see, what's the numbers? Okay. 1, 2, 50. Knockout of the year. Do you want me to tee these up for you, or do you want to take on some of the knockouts of the year and I'll come in on the back end?
Well, you've asked every segment. I should say you should probably just read them off every time.
Okay, so let me just do that because I've done all the segments, so that's how we've done it. I think Vladimir Hernandez, Guido Scrum was a tremendous knockout because it was like a Looney Tunes knockout. He got hit and fell face forward. Angelo Leo knocking out Luis Alberto Lopez was a sensational knockout. I think Daniel Dubois, Anthony Joshua would have been an iconic moment for a lot of moments in history. Gervonta Davis, Frank Martin, I didn't think was like an outstanding knockout, but it was memorable. Norman versus Santillan was a really, really good knockout. Bacoli versus Jared Anderson, not really a great knockout, but really a big statement. I think it's an iconic win. Obviously, Bruno Surace knocking out Munguia, I think, should be on this list. Joshua Ngannou could get thrown on this list just for the sheer fact of, it was a big one. Our guy, Ulysses Iglesias, knocking out Evgeny Shevchenko. Very scary knockout in that one. Those are kind of the ones I think that stand out most. Oh, and Bam Rodriguez stopping Juan Francisco Estrada as well. Those stand out the most.
I think another one to throw in there before we give the actual award is Angelo Leo knocking out Venado Lopez.
That was the one that I threw early on. You just missed it.
Oh, my bad. Well, to me, that was another one where it's like Angelo doesn't have that many knockouts. It's not as low of a percentage as Surace, but that was one that really came out of nowhere. Particularly, we've seen Venado in with other guys at the top level that probably hit harder and get hit cleaner, but that just caught him at, right on the button, and a several year title run came to an end.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, so the knockout of the year, in my opinion, is Lucas Batty knocking out Ashton Sylve. Break down what you saw in this one.
I mean, that's one of those scary knockouts, bro. When we talk about knockout of the year, there's a lot of times where a great punch lands and a guy goes down, but it's very rare that you get one of those knockouts where a guy is just completely separated from his senses. There was a couple of those last year that were really brutal. The one that's always stuck out to me was when Callum Smith knocked out, of course, now I'm going to forget his name, but there was a light heavyweight a few years ago, and he knocks the guy out, and the guy's legs are shaking after. And again, like I said, there's multiple instances, hard punch lands, guy goes down. But every once in a while, we get one of those knockouts that are just a little different. And Body versus Sylve felt like one of those knockouts. It was really a separate from your senses knockout.
Yeah, I mean that's something. So to me, it was also a story of someone taking someone deep into a fight and trying to land the perfect punch later in the fight. And when Ashton's punches slowed down, just catching him.
It was a crazy knockout, bro. It was one of those that also came out of nowhere. Sometimes you get a knockout where a guy's hurt, he's kind of backing up to the ropes, he's trying to keep a guy off of him, and the knockout happens. Then there's also ones that, the fight's going competitive, nobody's been buzzed, nothing, it's been 50-50, and then one guy just puts another guy out. Those are always the ones I think that stick out for me the most. There hadn't been a moment with Angelo and Venado where Venado had been hurt or where Angelo had been hurt. And so I think that was part of what was so shocking. And I think the same went for the Body and Sylve fight. It was just sudden.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Thank you,
I
Lukie.
guess one other thing I want to touch on is what else is there to touch on? Contender of the year. And to me, that's Keyshawn Davis. What do you think?
I think Keyshawn's a good pick. It's also a year where he's sort of emerging out of that prospect category into contender category, more recent times beating Pedraza. Now it looks like he's obviously, like Barack said, dominating Lemos, which was an insane knockout, particularly, with Lemos coming in a couple pounds heavy. But listen, bro, it's so tough. Like, contender of the year, when we talk about contender of the year, we're talking about somebody that has really solidified themselves as somebody that deserves an opportunity and deserves a big fight. I think Keyshawn is a great pick for that. I think Daniel Dubois is a great pick for that. We've talked about him being comeback fighter of the year. I think there's also an argument he's contender of the year. The only issue is he's a world champion now. So even if that's on a technicality with the IBF stripping Usyk, I still think that there's an argument to be made for Daniel Dubois being contender of the year. Now, though, we're going to see Keyshawn get his chance against Dennis Berinchyk, and I know that people, think that that's maybe like a mismatch or something, and it's possible that it is, but I think that Berinchyk has a level of experience and a certain amount of pedigree in terms of his amateur background that, we don't necessarily know how Keyshawn's going to react to that. So this may be the year, where this may be his last year as a contender, and he may be a champion sooner than later.
And I just wanted to add to you, Dubois is the IBF title holder, so he holds a belt, so he's not a contender. He's actually a world champion.
I know, but in my mind, he's a champion a little bit on a technicality. Not that he doesn't deserve a belt or whatever, but that would be my only reason.
I get it, but I mean, I just think that, like, we do have to set some forks in the road for this. I think Iglesias, the great Cuban fighter who's fighting in Canada a lot. He's a candidate for this type of award. Who else is out there that we could nominate? But I mean, really, to me, it's Keyshawn Davis. He should win the belt next year when he fights Baranchyk. I think we're all expecting him to have a dominant performance and look extremely good in that fight, and take it from there.
I think that, you know, Keyshawn is the best candidate for the award, bro. I just think that he's really arriving into his moment, and we're gonna find out just what level he's at when he gets in with Baranchyk.
Now let's finish off the show with our final segment, which is what did we miss? What did we miss in terms of this year? In general, what did we miss about this year?
Elaborate. What do you mean miss? Like what we didn't see?
Well, we didn't touch on the circus that was Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, which was a thing. Naoya Inoue, which most people won't say, had a terrible year. He didn't really look like the superstar he had looked prior. Japan is now a super hub for boxing. They're throwing multiple big shows a year with multiple belt holders. What else do we have that's going on? Just there's a lot of stuff.
I guess I'm trying to figure out what you mean by miss of the year, but I feel like
what do I mean by what did we miss this year? What doesn't fit a category we went through, but were important stories of the year. So for me, that would be Japan now has 9 world champions and is throwing a lot of different shows that if you really like boxing, you should be watching. Beyond just that, I think another thing that you should be aware of is that there's a middle class to boxing now. Pro Box TV, OTX Boxing, all these various outlets, Big Time Boxing USA.
What's 360 is doing?
360. There's a lot of really good hardcore middle class fights going on, and it might not be for everybody. A lot of people don't like those, but there was a real resurgence in grassroots boxing, keeping guys busy, focusing on developing guys. I think that was a really positive sign for me because in 2023, it felt like the trend was that we're getting away from big promoters throwing shows where guys could be active as much. And it was all top heavy at the top. And then the developmental fights, compelling, weren't always the greatest fights. They looked like they were being put together to kind of pad records or build guys up. And this year it felt as though there's 2 different tiers of cards. There's the big get you attracted, look at this fight card thing. And then you got the other type, which is a really good rebuild your career type on Pro Box TV, on OTX. And I think that's a story.
I think that's definitely a great story. I think for me, the big one is just sort of us, meaning Americans, in the space of elite boxing at the moment. I feel like we're less relevant than we've ever been. And when I look at my pound for pound list, anybody from our country that's on that list is highly inactive and is still relevant based on past accomplishments, but are not in 2024, you know, a central part of the game. Tank Davis, Terrence Crawford, Boots Ennis, Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez, Ryan Garcia, you name it, bro. Pick a star from the U.S. right now that has a legitimate pound for pound argument, and you tell me if they're active enough. And I would say that they're not, bro. I don't think fighting once a year, you can be the cool guy all you want, bro. But when you fight once a year, people only have but so much bandwidth to remember you. And I think that increasingly somebody like Tank Davis, as great as he is not relevant in the world of elite level boxing because we just don't see him. And so they become concepts. They're not necessarily athletes that we're looking to match, you know, in these divisions where we got Liam Paro and we got, you know, 140, we got Subriel Matias, we got all these guys, Hitchens, you know, our guys that are the stars are not looking to make those kind of fights. They sort of exist in this other capitalistic world that doesn't, the motives and what's important doesn't necessarily make sense to the fans or even reveal itself. So to me, that's kind of the missing story. Is it's like, we've talked about how we feel about generally about Saudi boxing and their government's involvement and this and that, but the game was there to be took, bro. We didn't care for it well in the post-Floyd era, the Western world, and it was there to be taken. And I think increasingly, our fighters make it hard to make a case that we're still, the most relevant aspect of this sport, or the most relevant distributor of the sport, because we just aren't, bro. Our guys are not active enough, and there's promotional reasons for that. There's all of the various financial issues that come into making a fight that have gotten increasingly more complicated in the post-Floyd era. But the bottom line is the results are the results, bro. Our guys don't fight.
In the chat, they're bringing up PBC. PBC had a horrible year. PBC is slowly dying. Riyadh is the new Vegas of boxing. Do you care to take on that question?
Well, I think that PBC is largely, built on American fighters, and they put on a couple of shows a year. So I think the decline of PBC and their decreasing relevance in the sport very much mirrors America's decreasing relevance in the sport. They were the network of Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. And at this point, I can't remember what the last card was. I think it was Murtaza Aliyev and Zoo. What was that, in like August? So, again, I remember when Floyd was at the top of the pound for pound list and he fought twice a year, and we were all like, this guy only fights twice a year. This is if I could get 2 fights a year out of Tank Davis, it would be like a fucking miracle at this point, bro.
Well, and I think that like there's a level now of celebrity that like some of these fighters want so much money and want to be such a celebrity that it's almost impossible for them to fight more than once a year because of the amount of money. And to be honest, like I think what's frustrating about Tank is he's probably a top 10 fighter, yet he's not taking interesting enough fights to most people to merit these really big salaries he takes.
And listen, I'm not hating on that, bro. It's a tough game. A lot of guys walk away without all their senses. Get your fucking money up. But just if that's the only priority, don't expect me to put you in the conversation with other greats. I'm just not going to. I'll put you in the conversation for richest, most talented, but I can't say that Tank Davis is in the same kind of conversation as other great fighters from the era prior. If it's Canelo, if it's Floyd, if it's Manny, the era that he sort of came out of, I can't put him in that conversation.
No, I hear you. What do you think of the Riyadh as the new Las Vegas? Because that's something that was kind of shocking to me, was like how just like
it was there to be taken, bro. It was there to be taken. We as I don't think America has been a good steward of boxing in the last.
Let me add this to you. The Dignity Health Park, which used to be the StubHub Center, which used to be the Home Depot Center, it was a legendary venue in Carson, California. Tennis court. They had a bunch of great matchups happen there. Tim Bradley versus Ruslan Ruslan. Why am I blanking on his name? Ruslan Provodnikov. He fought there. Brandon Rios versus Mike Alvarado. One was there. There's like all these iconic fights. Maidana and Josecito had a great fight there. All these good fights at that venue, right? So that fight venue only had one fight this year. It's an iconic California venue. And part of that's taxes and other things, but that was a Diego Pacheco versus Sulecki fight. And I don't know how many fights Vegas had, but they didn't have that many. If we're really being honest, there wasn't that much being built around it. And I think for me, it's Riyadh and Texas and Florida starting to emerge more so as boxing's hubs than New York, California, and Las Vegas, which used to be. And Riyadh is getting the biggest fights. But I think what's interesting to me is New York is not getting a lot of big shows anymore. They're not getting a ton of shows. California barely gets any shows anymore. And Vegas is getting shows occasionally, but it's not feeling the same. And it's really everyone's trying to fight in Texas and everyone's trying to fight in
Which
Florida.
is a shame because those are by far the worst commissions we have. I mean, in terms of the judging and refereeing, and it's horrible. I feel like you're as likely to get a bad decision in Texas as anywhere on planet Earth.
Okay, so now we're going to do I said the last segment, but this will be the quote unquote last segment, Dakota. It is, what do we do moving forward? What is boxing in 23? What is 2025's outlook for boxing?
I'm not really too sure. We're in new territory. So I think that we're in an era where things are just going to change, because the old way wasn't working, and there's going to be good parts of that, and there's going to be really bad parts of that too. But it's certainly a sport that's kind of redefining itself. We see that with the Saudi involvement. We see that with the success of Jake Paul and Mike Tyson and more spectacle oriented fights. You know, it's a sport. And then we see the highs of the better beef Bivol and the Usyk and the Furies. You know, it's peaks and valleys in boxing right now. And I'm not entirely sure what the direction of the sport is, but I know that it's changing. And maybe boxing is in need of a shakeup.
Is it changing for the better or changing for the worse? And also, Carlos Mondragon Villalobos said Tio beat Jack Taylor this year. I think he meant Josh Taylor. And that actually surprisingly was in 2023 of all things. So even though that felt like that was this year, that actually wasn't this year.
Yeah, and if you're going to use Tio as the argument, like American stars are active, that's not the guy, my boy. Sorry. I think it's changing for the better and the worse. You know, I think there are things that are worse about boxing than they've ever been, and I think that there are matchups that we're getting at a frequency in 2024 that we haven't in recent years. So I think there are parts of it that are getting better. I think that there are parts of it that are getting worse, and that's sort of always happening with boxing, right? It's always getting better and it's always getting worse.
Yeah, I think that the tough thing is, like, with Riyadh cards, there's definitely not a focus on American-based fighters. And I think that fight fans maybe next year will understand America is not the focus. These cards are not as interested in American fighters. I think that because the UK is closer to Riyadh, it's easier for the people in Saudi to follow fighters from the UK as opposed to American fighters.
Why would they want our guys, bro? Our guys don't fight. So nobody.
And I think I think there's also a sentiment that some of our guys want to do the old way of thinking, which was, let's prolong fights, let's get a lot of money, and then when it's our time, we'll cash in. And that's not the way boxing's going. It's now mega fights, big spectacles, 50-50 matchups. And not saying Tank is opposed to that or Boots Ennis is opposed to that, but it's not been easy for them to do it. And then what Canelo,
not a priority for them.
Yeah, it's not a priority. And then with Canelo, I genuinely think he's basically a retired fighter now. He's taken fights, but he's taking matchups that I think he feels he has every physical advantage or a skill advantage. And it's the fights that he's most beneficial in. He's not the Benavidez fight. I don't think is possible at this point, because if that fight were to have happened, Benavidez is now rounding into his prime, and Canelo, I think, is past his prime. So why would this fight happen if Canelo didn't make the fight happen sooner, which would have been an interesting fight? And I get that there's an argument to be made. If Benavidez had kept his belt and not gotten in trouble, he could have gotten the fight. But it's still rather irritating that basically Canelo is doing exhibition fights or fights that he deems good enough for him, but he's not kind of pursuing the active champions.
Right. Exactly. Like, the game's changing, bro. Shit is shifting.
So pound for pound list right now, we got Better Beef, Bivol, Inoue, Terrence, Canelo, etc. How many of those guys fight in 2026? Are there 2 or 3 of those guys on that list that are not fighting in 2026?
Do you mean 2025, or are you thinking that far
No,
ahead?
I think they're all going to take one fight in 2025. But what I'm saying is, how
Who
many
retires?
guys are retiring? Because I think we're hitting that point that we hit a while ago, in which Terrence Crawford was the best fighter in the world, but no one wanted to believe it because Floyd stepped down in 2014 and the world had seismically shifted. But all the good fighters were stepping back. So it was strange to see like a Jesse Bam Rodriguez as number 2 on the pound for pound list. I don't think that's as strange now, but I remember before we knew it, Terrence Crawford was the best fighter in the world. And it was something where there was a lot of people in denial going, that can't be the guy. And I'm just kind of saying to you, Dakota, how far away are we from that world?
I mean, I think we're getting close to the Usyks and the Beterbieves and the Crawfords and some of the guys on the high, and maybe even Canelo, start to drop off in the next 3 years. I don't know how many of them drop off in 2026, but I think we're winding down an era. There's no doubt about it.
This year felt like the Saudi inclusion, really, but it really felt like this year, it felt like this was the passing of the torch in a way, where it's like you get guys like Usyk, who in another era would never have really been a relevant fighter because of the politics of boxing, and like he'd be willing to fight guys, but it'd only be if people rolled the dice, etc., on him. And now you've got him as like the ambassador of boxing, and it's like an awkward guy who can just really fight. And what would you say for 15 years prior? It was more substance than it was more flash than substance. A lot of times it was personality driven. And I guess that's our final talking point, just so I can stay out in this barn a tad bit longer, is as we go into 2025, let's have a final debate about personality driven boxing versus achievement driven. And what does that look like?
Right. And achievement driven boxing, I think Barack Moody is making a great point. You know, what if there's high level guys that don't want to fall in line? Do they no longer have access to the biggest events in boxing? And if so, what's the second biggest promoter or event creator in boxing? I'm not really sure. There's a couple of guys in the mix for that. But certainly personality driven boxing, we saw, gets a lot of audience, bro. I mean, the biggest stories of the year are Jake Paul and Mike Tyson and Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney. And that's frankly pretty fucking embarrassing, that those in terms of media coverage are and viewership are the biggest events of the year. That's where I think boxing is getting worse, is that those are ultimately the kinds of events that are drawing the most eyes. And because it's drawing the eyes of people that are not traditional boxing fans. And there's going to be more of it. There's no doubt about it. Ultimately, there will have to be like a wrench thrown in the plan. Jake Paul will get knocked out by somebody at some point. There will be things that happen that shake up that world, but ultimately it will always kind of reinvent itself as long as there's an audience.
And I think the other thing for me personally too is it's easier to buy into pro wrestling or the personality, the talking. I'm going to fight you with the Sportatorium on 15 and all that. And with the ratings, does there come a time where more Jake Paul influencer misfits? And Jake, I think, is doing a better job than most. He's kind of bringing boxing with him, but you have these misfits fight cards, which are basically just influencers. Misfits boxing has a lot of DAZN fight dates. I think they might even have more dates than Golden Boy has currently. And it's like, are we going to get to a point where just the sheer numbers from a business standpoint, these cards make more sense than putting on world champions, or at the least, world champions are going to be featured as
Well, they're a really safe bet. They're a really safe bet because the people watching it are not watching it for the quality of the boxing. We live in an influencer culture now where people will follow a person and say, well, I'll watch whatever they do. And it doesn't really matter what the substance of that is.
That's an important statement. And I guess what I'm saying is like there's guys like Shock Foster, right? And Shock Foster is not going to ever be like an influencer, but he's a great fighter. There's guys like Oscar Collazo. There's guys like Usyk, Beterbiev. These are not going to be great hangs on social media, but they deserve a chance. They deserve to be on cards. And I worry at times that even with these young fighters, it's all about their personality and what they do. And like with Keyshawn, there's a level of he's from an era that I'm not from. You get what I'm saying? Like the way he interacts, and you can tell he's had a cell phone in his hand for a lot of his life. Whereas like I think cell phones with internet came into my hand about 23, 24. And I just worry like when do you think the first, let me look this up. First iPhone came out. iPhone first.
Probably like 2010.
I think it's earlier. So 2007 was the first iPhone. So that's what, 3, and then we'll go to 2025. So that's 18 years. So basically any 18-year-old person now has lived in a world where cell phones have access to the internet. And that's what I kind of worry is that's coming. Like that is the future. That is the world. And what does that look like? Because I don't think that's probably going to be a net positive. I think there's going to be some positives with it. Like I think young kids are multimedia geniuses now. I think they're like able to do things that like before they couldn't. But I am concerned about the level of like, oh, I like this guy because he punches walls, because that's the like Dakota, do you ever run into this where you don't know how to interact with younger people if they text you because they send you like a meme or movie clips to express an emotion and I don't understand what they're doing? So then it starts a weird conversation where I'm like, why did you do that? And they're like, oh, it's a way to How does that come into boxing? Because that person
It's already in boxing, bro.
But what I'm saying is that person in the next 4 to 6 years is going to be coming of age in our sport. And they're going to be the ones that really their personalities drive the sport. And what does that look like for the sport? Because a lot of the fighters that we're driven to, right? A lot of the pound for pound guys you like, they're in their mid 30s. They're not from this generation. So what happens when this generation that grew up with smartphones takes over? Like that's what I wonder is like what happens when Ryan Garcia becomes the elder statesman of boxing? When Devin Haney's the elder statesman? What does the next generation that's trying to be edgy look like? And maybe that's just I went rambling, but that's something I think about for next year.
Tough to know, bro, but it's a good question.
Okay, I guess that's the show. I think it was a good one. Dakota, thank you as always for humoring me. Where can people support you?
You can always support me at the Slip and Weave podcast at ITR Boxing, and you can always catch me on the Lukie Boxing Show. We go every fucking weekend, guys. We appreciate you in the chat.
Every week. So we will be back next week. Oh, wait, actually, you know what? I pump faked you, Dakota. We might as well spend 2 minutes since I've kept you on this long. We might as well do 2 minutes on Puma versus Ioka because nobody else will preview this. And it's actually a good fight. So we're going to just pump fake you and do that. What do you think of this fight besides the fact that there's basically no way to watch it? It's a rematch. It's a title fight. I think Ioka's whole career hasn't been televised in America, which basically means he's going to probably not get in the Hall of Fame despite being a 4-division title holder because no one's ever been able to do it.
I think that's the story of the fight, bro, is that you can't watch it as much as it's a great matchup that I personally would love to see. I think both guys are tremendous. At the end of the day, if I don't hear the tree fall in the woods, I didn't hear it. So I think that whether it's a relevant fight in Japan or in boxing or not, doesn't matter because nobody's going to see it. So it's just going to be a concept for people, unfortunately, as good as these guys are.
And I think the hard part is like Puma Martinez emerged, came out of nowhere, defeated Jerwin and Kanajas, kind of the end of the pandemic. And from that, he's kind of taken on a new life as a fighter and everything. And this has been a big moment for him, defeating Ioka. And it's sadly really irrelevant because nobody, and Ioka had a fight with Joshua Franco that everyone tells me was really good a few years ago, filmed on an iPhone. Mikey Garcia was the distribution. It was on IG. Then he wins the rematch. It just, to me, fight cards like this with the growing interest in Japanese boxing and people looking at the sport as a world thing. When you have Ioka, who I think is a Hall of Famer, and Martinez, who's, would you say he's the most interesting fight for Bam Rodriguez in the division?
Probably, but I think that we're still in that era where there are going to be regional fights that may be big regionally, but whoever's promoting it or investing in it doesn't see it as something that requires or is worthy of international distribution. We just saw that with Natasha Jonas's last fight. Like, it's only on Sky Sports in the UK. And so
I think it was on
unfortunately,
Peacock. I didn't check, but I think that they do it on Peacock, NBC for us. It's just not easy to find.
well, that wasn't made obvious at all. So as far as I'm concerned, it didn't happen. That I think that there are going to be, unfortunately, for whatever reason with Ioka, there isn't that international investment the way there is with Inoue and some other guys. And he may be big out there, and maybe some point that translates into an ESPN or a DAZN or an Amazon Prime stream service. But at the moment, it's just not enough.
Yeah, it's strange, right? Because it's never been better to be a flyweight than it is right now, because the flyweight division is just rip roaring and you get TV dates. Yet here's one of probably the best hardcore fights, and nobody's able to watch it. And it's like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, what are we doing, guys? So I think that this deserved a preview. The fight is happening whenever, let's see, we'll be back. Let's come back. We'll be back next Wednesday, unless, doesn't work. Or maybe we'll be back on the 31st, because the fight happens in Japan on New Year's Eve, as they always do. But we're going to have to read a story on it, or hopefully they put it on YouTube, because it's just stupid. It's stupid, and I don't know. But we'll be back probably Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on our schedules. And it is a slow start. So just to make a long show even longer, let me just tell you how slow it is to start, Dakota. So we start out, we have this fight, the Ioka fight. Then we go to a Wednesday Jay Apataya fight against David Naoya, which is a good fight, but it's a Wednesday card in Australia. That is followed by Caroline Dubois on Peacock that weekend. Then we have a 360 Promotions card on January 17th. Naoya Inoue versus Sam Goodman, the 24th. Pro Box TV card on the 24th. Diego Pacheco versus Steve Nelson, the 25th. And then we're at Benavidez Morel. So how does that start of the year feel to you, Dakota?
It's not terrible, but I think it's indicative of what we were talking about in the last 3 months, where it's like there's nothing for January yet.
But to me, it just it's better than I expected, but it's a very so, and then I swear I'll let you get off, is it feels very on brand for boxing right now, where it's like, if you fight in the first 3 months of a year, you have a chance to be the boxer of the year, because you typically, if it's a slow year, you could get 3 or 4 fights in, right? And instead, it's like, we're not really, maybe Jay Apataya is the guy, maybe Pacheco could be the guy, or Andy Cruz, but I don't really look in January and see, okay, there's a fighter of the year nominee there. Maybe Benavidez and Morel, but even with that, I have a hard time believing that they fight more than twice this year, both of them. Just nothing tells me that they're going to be fighting a lot this year. So I guess that's the thing, is you used to be able to go, okay, Adonis Stevenson's fighting Q1 January. Maybe he'll be fighter of the year, which he was that year because he just fought a lot. And now when I look at this schedule, it's like, okay, what fights am I into? But there's no, let's write this down,
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the show. Anything else that you wanted to talk about for this hour and 40-minute mega extravaganza?
I think we covered it, bub.
We covered everything. Okay, thank you, Dakota.